Most software doesn't have an if-else problem. It has a design shape problem. And the cost shows up as rigid code, painful tests, and class explosion. In this video, I'll show you the design pattern that fixes this. So let's dive in. I stopped using if-else statements, and instead, I moved selection into a factory, and I compose behaviors as pipelines. That's the difference between code that bends and code that breaks. Let me show you. This is the logical mind move. Make a hierarchy. It feels neat. It feels organized. But as soon as behavior varies across more than one dimension, the hierarchy explodes. Inheritance is great for polymorphism. But when we use inheritance to specialize, this plus a little more, then we start encoding optional behaviors into types. And this is how you get class explosion. Each new axis of variation multiplies combinations. Tests explode too. Each combo implies new scenarios, and it grows exponentially. The hierarchy is a false model. Really, it's a web, not a tree. When Gang of Four said prefer aggregation over inheritance, this is what they meant. Inheritance has its place. It's useful for classification, but it's not useful to specialize behaviors. The signal is optional behaviors can accumulate, and that could be a problem. So why isn't strategy enough? In the last episode, we looked at how strategy and abstract factory allow us to constrain the right combination of behaviors that we want. Strategy is absolutely part of the solution, but not because it eliminates conditionals. Strategy moves conditionals from the production code into a cohesive place, which is the factory. And it separates something critical, which is the selection of an action from the action itself. By separating those two things, we can grow the software in ways that don't break the callers. So strategy makes behaviors swappable behind an interface, but something still has to choose which strategy to use. Conditionals don't go away, they're just moved into the factory. And if we have multiple conditionals, they can collapse into one set in the factory. All that's good. Factories are allowed to know identities and make identity decisions. That isolates those decisions from the rest of the code. The client's job is action. The factory returns the right action objects, and then the client uses them to take the actions. Why is this a good idea? Because it allows the separation of action from implementation, allowing us to add new implementations without breaking the callers. That's the essence of polymorphism. It's a big word, and it's a really simple concept. It separates identity coupling, which is in the factory, from interface coupling, which is in the client. And the strategy helps when there's variations of choosing among multiple different algorithms. Which one? The problem here is bigger. We're varying, not just choosing an algorithm or a set of algorithms, we're choosing a sequence of algorithms, which multiple strategies together really can't do. We're choosing whether we want to have multiple steps or we want to have fewer or more steps. That's the cardinality or the number of steps. And it's really hard to do that in a sequence of strategies. This is the threshold where the decorator pattern appears. I use the decorator all the time. It's one of my very favorite patterns because it gives me maximum flexibility. It would give me too much flexibility, but remember, we know how to constrain the decorator, the same technique we used in the last video to constrain the strategy, which is to build the right decorators in our factories. And so the factories constrain the decorator so that we can execute only the steps that we want to execute in the order that we want to execute it. So what's the intent of the decorator really? The decorator is not a linked list or a pipeline. Those are just implementation details. Decorator lives in its intent, like all patterns do. And for the decorator, the intent is to add responsibilities to an object dynamically without changing the object's core behavior or role. The way patterns manifest are just in implementation details. I could implement a design pattern like the decorator using a linked list, like they did back in 1995 for the Gang of Four. This is the canonical design pattern for the decorator, but honestly, it's not the approach that I take. I'll show you the code that I usually use. It's just basically a list where I have a collection of different decorators that I want to execute because it's a lot simpler and easier to follow. It's 3 lines of code instead of like 20. So they're both decorators because they're both adding optional behaviors dynamically. And because they're fulfilling the same intent, there's the same pattern. So this is one of the most valuable things that I've learned from design patterns, which is to separate out what we like to call the forces. So we're talking about contextual forces. This tells me when a pattern is present in the problem, where I can see the pattern. But remember, patterns are all about fulfilling intent. There are many ways to do that. So the other set of forces we call implementation forces are all around how to implement the pattern. And it gives me options for implementing the pattern. I can implement a decorator, like I say, as a linked list or as a collection or as a straight list or even an array. There are many different ways to implement this pattern, depending upon the language, performance, and other factors. And then what I end up with is something more suitable for the particular situation that I'm in. So the decorator allows me to make behaviors modular. They have to be modular. And they're also independently testable, which is a valuable thing. And you'll notice this about pretty much all the Gang of Four design patterns is they're very straightforward to test and verify. The way you basically verify a decorator is you can verify each one of the chain, each link in the chain, by just simply calling it with the right parameters and seeing what it returns. So if it's like a bucket brigade, which is a kind of a decorator, you can look at what you pass in and what you get out and validate it that way. You could also use handcrafted mocks to just tell you that the decorator was called. A valid test might be to start the chain with a decorator so that when that basically logs or something like that. So that when it's called, all the other previous decorators were called first, and you can see in the log that the last one was called. And that can validate that, the other ones were called as well. So you can do little unit tests like that to validate different aspects of your decorators, that they're built correctly, that they're processed correctly. That is extremely, really, really helpful because, decorators are typically applying multiple optional behaviors, and sometimes they compose and sometimes they don't compose. So being able to verify every step of the way is really important and really valuable. And the decorator gives us sort of a process for doing that. Behaviors remain modular and independently testable. You can compose behaviors without copying code. The decorator increases the dimension of polymorphism. Strategy just varies one behavior. The decorator varies many, and their order, and whether they're actually included or not. Those are all decisions that are made in the factory when the decorator chain is built. This is how object-oriented programs stay extensible without turning into chaos. Okay, let's look at a demo. Here are steps of an interface. What does the code shape look like? Each step does one thing. They all share the same abstraction. And the pipeline knows nothing about the specifics, only that it can process a context. This is the power of abstract methods. Here's the abstraction. Payment step, process. Here's a step. Here's our validation step. And here's our logging step. Notice they all call process, but in their process method, they do different things. One job, one reason to change, one reason to exist. The pipeline is boring on purpose. It just simply loops through each one of the items in the pipeline. The variation is now data, the step, not type, a subclass. This is the open-close principle in action. You can add a step without editing the pipeline logic. You can change the order of a step. You can test each step individually. The cardinality is explicit and testable. The shape supports clarity for humans and for AI. This is my go-to pattern when I want maximum flexibility. If I don't need flexibility, then this is just overhead. So who decides which decorator or which steps to apply? If callers assemble pipelines everywhere, you get chaos. So we put the selection logic in a single place. Again, it's the factory. Factories are where the conditionals belong. They make the decisions, but they don't take the actions. We want to centralize the selection of valid combinations, and we do that in a factory. We put our conditionals in factories, and they instantiate the right set of objects. Factories encode policy. Pipelines execute policy. The factory encodes the right selection for the decorators we want, and then we execute in the production code. This increases flexibility, which could be a good thing, but if we don't need the flexibility, it increases the need for testing, it increases the complexity of understanding. I use decorators a lot because I find that it gives me a lot of flexibility, and I'm very used to reading and understanding them. And I know how to document them well. For people who are unfamiliar with the decorator pattern, it's a little scary. I remember the first time I discovered the decorator was in the very first program I wrote for money. I was working for an independent software developer who was making banking software and needed a whole bunch of reports. And I said, let me build you a report writer. And it was great because, I told him it took me an afternoon to write a report. He was expecting it would take 3 or 4 days, so he was very happy. It really took like 5 minutes because my report writer was so good. And the report writer was the decorator pattern. I just basically saw this pattern. This was in 1984 timeframe, 5 timeframe. So long before, a decade before the Gang of Four wrote, but this is very common. Many developers discover design patterns. That's why we know they're valuable, because we keep coming upon them over and over again. So when should you not use the decorator? And what's the cost? I think the cost is really, obscurity. It's really hard to understand if you're not familiar with the decorator. It gives you flexibility, but the flexibility isn't free. If the domain didn't ask for these optional ordered combinations of behaviors, then you're paying a very high price. And just using it to replace conditionals willy-nilly gives you decorator soup. And that can be kind of hard to parse through. Patterns are not solutions hunting for problems. They're attractors in the problem space. When you see them, when you see the forces that give them away, you know the pattern is there. It becomes obvious. And the form can then vary. What the pattern is or how it fits into that particular situation can change, as long as you're fulfilling the intent. The real skill here is unlearning. Stop imposing hierarchies when we have webs. The decorator helps us do that. The logical mind loves hierarchies, but reality loves networks. Our job is to model what is there, not what feels cool or neat or tidy. This is senior design, seeing the shape of things and using that to build the right solutions. The decorator solves class explosion by composing responsibilities, but it raises a new question. How do we route work through a growing system without hard-coding flow? That's exactly what we talk about in the next episode with the chain of responsibility. If you want the full mental model, watch the playlist from the beginning. Each episode adds one new shape. Until next time, happy coding.